Welcome to Whova's Event Insider panel discussion series. My name's Marisa, and I'll be your host. Our Event Insider sessions offer great tips and insights from experienced event professionals on various topics in the event management industry.
Today, we will be discussing hybrid events with guest speakers Ashley Armstrong, Director of Event and Destination Management at Factor 110, and Stott, Global Event Director and Producer and the founder of Your Event Ninja.
If you're interested in viewing more content for event organizers, subscribe to our channel where you can see more interviews with top event professionals and new content on the latest event industry trends. Now let's get into the discussion. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Whova's Event Insider panel session. I'd just like to start off by introducing myself. My name is Marisa, and I will be the host and moderator for today's panel. This edition of Whova's Event Insider series will dive into the topic of hybrid events. We have a great panel discussion in store, and I am excited to get into it with our two wonderful guest speakers. So first, I am very excited to welcome Ashley Armstrong to the virtual stage. Ashley is joining us from Oklahoma City, where she is the Director of Event and Destination Management at Factor 110. Ashley, thank you so much for being here. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. As she said, I am in Oklahoma City with Factor 110. We are actually a DMC out of Oklahoma City, and we purchased an audiovisual company probably a couple of months before the pandemic hit. And that really thrust us into virtual events. And now we've gone into, more in-person and hybrid events. So we do a little bit of everything at Factor 110, but for the past 2 years, we've really focused on using Whova and doing these virtual events.
Great, thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
And next we have Stott joining us from Salt Lake City, who is a global event director and producer and owner of Your Event Ninja. So we are so glad to have you on the panel today, Song. And so I'm going to turn the mic to you now to introduce yourself as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. Yes, like she said, my name is Song. I've been using Whova now for, a couple of years, doing hybrid events, online events. And yeah, last year was kind of crazy. So God, I am like an expert now in Whova. But no, very excited to be a part of this panel. And it's funny, Ashley and I realized that we know each other from previous lives. So, these networking events and being able to gather online is really awesome to stay connected. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Song. All right. So I am really looking forward to all that you guys are going to share with us today about your experience running hybrid events. So to make sure we have time with everything and to get to our audience questions in the end, I just want to dive right into our question list for today. So to start, I want to talk about the technical setup of hybrid events. So my first question for you both is, what is the best way to handle the technical setup of a hybrid event? And is it necessary to hire a production company to manage it? Ashley, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Sure. I definitely think this depends on the size of your meeting. I would always say hire a production company if you this is your first time trying a hybrid event. I think that technically, it's double the work. If all of your speakers are in person and you're having one general session room and that's all that you're streaming, then you can usually get away with your typical setup with, maybe one person managing Whova in the back and making sure things are running smoothly. If you're running a convention that has some speakers in person, some virtual, some sessions are virtual and some are in person, I would really suggest hiring a production company. We, start from the bottom and go up. We are going to send your speakers a description of, here's what you're going to do when you log into Zoom. You're going to turn your camera on, and you're going to make sure you have a good lighting and background, and really coaching your speakers through how to do things. Everyone's used Zoom, but I still think it's a good idea to have someone there, when you open the session, to be like, hey, I'm your tech today. I'll be here to support you if anything goes wrong, and just to run the session for you. So I would highly recommend hiring a production company.
Great, thank you, Beth. Song, do you want to add on to this one?
Yeah, sure. Again, like Ashley said, just it really does depend on the size of your conference or meeting and really your agenda structure, right? So one of my events, hybrid events, we live streamed the plenary sessions, the general sessions, and then we had literally 2 conferences running at the same time. We had the online conference and then we had the in-person conference. And so there were presenters that were strictly online. And then we had at the same time the concurrent sessions that were live and in person. And so definitely did not need a production team to do the sessions that were online. We did have room hosts, just like Ashley mentioned, because it is very nice to have somebody there, one to open up the room, the Zoom room, or whichever streaming or video service you're using, and then to just do the mic check, do the sound check, make sure that you find all of your panelists or presenters, and then welcome people to that room, just like you would in the in-person. So definitely if you're streaming out from your main stage or your plenary sessions, I would definitely have a production team, because it is definitely different you can't just well, I guess you could just plug in your phone and the audio might be really awful, but they know all the ins and outs of that. So depending on what you're doing, definitely have that production team for the big things. And then if you don't need that massive bit of AV and you're not live streaming all your other sessions, then you could just have a separate team or at least a couple of room hosts or technical folks to do that strictly online part.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you for both starting us off with some really useful tips. I do want to move on to our next question, which is about staffing. So a common concern, kind of going off of the first question, a big concern for hybrid event organizers, especially first timers, is the amount of staffing and resources required to manage a hybrid event. So my question is, how can you set up your staff to be able to support both sides of the event? Song, I'm going to turn the mic back to you first for this one.
Okay, sure. Obviously, planning is key, right? That's why we're all called event planners. So really outlining what are your objectives and who needs to go where. And if you kind of have, whatever spreadsheets or, project management stuff, make sure that you're outlining each component of your agenda and then what staffing that you need, right? Just like any regular in-person event, but do not forget about the online components, because you definitely need somebody there, again, to welcome people, to do some technical, online, again, if you're using Zoom or whatever. And then a lot of time, in 2021, we relied a lot also on volunteers, because a lot of folks were financially unable to attend at full price. So we took that as an opportunity to get some additional manpower and provide little scholarships or discounts for people who then, were volunteering and helping with the conference. But in general, it didn't require a ton of additional people. There were actually probably more volunteers and help for the in-person than there was needed for the online or the hybrid component. So yeah, it was almost the same. Probably, I don't even know if it was 10% more that we needed, because again, we were doing those two events simultaneously.
Yeah, thank you, Song.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's going to, be double your size and staff for a hybrid event. I think the key to not doubling your size and staff is to keep things simple. You don't need to live stream every single session. You don't need to live stream 10 sessions at a time. Everyone knows that this is a new world that we're living in. As long as you are making sure that, your main sessions, your general sessions are being live streamed, then your staff is not going to have to double in size. Now, if you want to live stream 10 breakouts and a general session, you're going to have to make sure that you have a camera in every single room, and then you're going to have to make sure you have a tech in every single Zoom room. So that's going to be when you start really needing more staff.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to keep moving here. Our next question relates to one of our pre-event polls as well, and I'm excited to kind of hear what you guys both think about this one. So when it comes to hybrid events, people often wonder, what the best pricing breakdown is between the in-person and remote tickets. So in your all's experience, what is the best way to price those two tickets? Ashley, why don't you go ahead on this one?
We have always said, even from the beginning, never free. That's just going to make your content seem not important. It's just as important as it was when you were doing your conference in person. I think the only time you might look at discounting is if you want to take like the meal cost or something out of the ticket for those that are attending on site. But your content is still valuable. People a lot of times still need it for, accreditation and things like that. So don't make it free. You're going to have costs that are in addition. When you're doing a hybrid event, it's costing you more to actually do the event. So yeah, that's just my recommendation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Song.
Yeah, absolutely. Always have people have some skin in the game. Don't do it for free. There's so many other ways to keep people connected with, free webinars or other things that are not, as big as your conference or your big convention or meeting. We priced ours, again, like Ashley said, we took out some of the hard costs of attending in person, like food and beverage, receptions and things like that, and obviously took that out of the online ticket price. We also, to show the value, because what we didn't want people to not attend in person, because the value was, oh man, for $100, which is like, a fourth of the cost for attending in person. We didn't want that to deter people from coming in person. So we really tried to show and outline the value with both, right? Here's what you get in person. And then we also said, all of the sessions that we have online, the in-person people will have access to on demand after. So that really did give a good value for the in-person ticket, but then the online only ticket, it was very reasonable so that people could, felt like, oh yeah, this is a great deal. I'm still getting my hours, right? Continuing education credit hours, and I'm still staying connected to my peers. So that's how we structured that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys both for sharing on that. I'm going to shift gears now to talk about one of the key benefits of a hybrid event, which is, the opportunity to reach a broader audience. So offering that option to join remotely, it allows attendees who don't want to travel for the event or to who can't travel, they are still able to participate. So you're able to reach this broader audience, but with this comes a question of how can you accommodate virtual attendees who are in different time zones? So Song, I'm going to turn the mic back to you for this one.
Well, you can't help everybody. That is one thing, as planners, right? We're like, we can't have everything be vegan, gluten-free, red meat, and so it's the same thing with the time zones. I would say, in all your planning, make sure that you're bouncing your ideas off your peers and off of obviously your stakeholders. We did toy around with the idea of maybe we should do it in this time zone on this day for the online, and then this time zone in the other, to get more of the East Coast folks, or maybe, oh gosh, we've got to include Hawaii on this part. So I guess it kind of just depends. But we then said, oh my gosh, this is getting way too complicated. So because it's a hybrid, what we'll do is we'll set all the time zones in the time zone where the in-person is going to be. So for one of mine, it was in Palm Springs, California. So everything was in Pacific time, and that was it across the board, just to make it simple. And then also because we were, the sessions are on demand then after, that was also, it's a big benefit, right, to keeping connected and keeping people being able to log in whenever they wanted to, or when it was convenient for them, and watch those sessions. So some of the things that we were doing hybrid wise together, right, live streaming, or maybe it was we had kind of an online icebreaker for the online folks. We definitely tried to centralize that so that more people could participate. But then the rest of it, we just stuck with the time zone that was where we were hosting the in-person.
Yeah, definitely.
We hosted an international, it was virtual, so it wasn't hybrid, but I would recommend for sure, like Song said, use the time zone that you're in, because you're going to confuse people. But record, make everything on demand. The great thing about Whova is we encourage our speakers to go in at least 24 hours after your session and try to answer the questions in the Q&A in the chat. That way, the people that watch it, later or in their time zone are still feeling like they're able to ask questions and able to get some answers and still have some participation in the event. We also had one where we showed a session at 2 different times in the day, or we did a live session at 2 different times in the day to try to accommodate more people. I know that can't always happen, but it's another, way to try to reach more people in the live audience.
Yeah. Yes, thank you guys both for sharing on that. I think a lot of our audience members will be interested in this next topic as well, which is about offering a valuable experience to your vendors. So this can obviously be a huge challenge regardless of the event format, but my question is, how can you take advantage of the hybrid event format to create more opportunities and value for sponsors and exhibitors? So Song, let's hear from you first on this one.
Okay. Well, you just say, hey, you get double your fun, right? And again, the marketing, whatever marketing communications plan campaign that you have, make sure that you include the vendors as a critical piece of your communication. And we really did outline that value that you could have double the exposure, and sometimes we also had folks who were like, oh, I chatted with, the booth, the expo vendor online, and then I went and saw them in person, and then vice versa. We did encourage our vendors to have maybe 2 staff, right? We all know that sometimes this does require double. And so they did. They had their in-person folks there. And then because they're, depending on how you structure the timing of the expo hall open, they also then had staff online that strictly staffed the online portion. But it was a great opportunity, I think, for our vendors also, because usually, if anybody passes by your booth, then you have to exchange business cards. You have to go through that process. Whereas on the platform, it was so easy for their vendors to continue to message folks and to stay in touch and be like, oh yeah, shoot, I lost your card. And they just messaged within the platform, and they stayed connected and kept that lead. So that was really beneficial, and some positive things that I heard from our expo booth folks.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's kind of the same as just in person, like you get out of it what you're going to put into it. So we try to do a session with the exhibitors on how to set up a good virtual booth. So, use raffles and use pictures and use videos. We also really recommend having a time in the day where they have the ability to just do a live session within the virtual world. Like Song said, it's great if they have multiple people there, because you're going to be dealing with in-person and virtual. But if you have like a little spot in the day where you can say, okay, this is the virtual exhibit hall, and that way they can all do a Zoom link in their little booth, and they can all talk to people face to face virtually. I think that helps make the exhibitors and the attendees feel more involved.
Yeah, I'll agree. And so just say one more thing, that also helps connect the online only attendees, right? Having some online only either networking things or expo time, so that they're really connected with the conference. I think that helps. But Ashley, I think you've now mentioned twice how you have kind of this prep for your speakers, you have prep for your vendors. Absolutely. And one of the things that I found very helpful in Whova is that I set up rehearsal times for all of my online presenters, all of my online vendors, and kind of just did an open house, like, hey, I am literally going to be sitting here for 2 hours in Hoover during these times. So please come and ask me questions. Of course, we recorded it and sent it out to people, but it also helped with them having to get logged on. So that, it's like, it's one thing for attendees to be like, I can't figure out how to get on the Hoover platform. But the vendors and people who are paying to participate from that aspect, or speakers who are, they're there, this is their reputation, making sure that they're already on the platform. That was kind of my sneaky little way of making sure that everybody was on before, but providing that time for Q&A and to walk them through some of the best practices that we found, because we do this a lot with a lot of different, folks. That was extremely helpful and gave them a lot of peace of mind on how they could participate and maximize, their experience.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That's a great use of the rehearsal sessions. And I also heard you mention kind of using the exhibitor booth in the online portion of that to really get your own virtual only attendees engaged. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is about engaging your attendees. So what are your best tips to engage in-person and remote participants equally? So, for example, how can you make sure your presenters and your moderators involve both audiences? Ashley, why don't you go ahead and start on this one?
So for like the simple Q&A portion of a session, when you're trying to involve, the online people and the in-person. So we recommend that everyone in the room and everyone online use Hoover to ask questions. So they're using their mobile app in person and they're using their computer when they're watching virtually. So then we have a moderator in the room who has a microphone and they're reading the questions to the speaker. That way people can vote on the same questions. The people online feel like, oh, they can see my question, and they're not being ignored. And that gets, the people in person to be using their app. We want them, a lot of times people come and they don't ever even open their app. So if we're forcing them, that's the only way you can ask questions. Then they get on their app, and then that sees, oh, I can chat with this person that's not here, but I see every year and I didn't get to see them this year. So, the attendees can start chatting, they can start, community boards, and the people in person and virtually can kind of commingle within the app. Another way I would recommend is, like, if you're having a roundtable in person, it's not going to be a great experience for a virtual attendee. So set up different sessions for virtual attendees. So set up a roundtable virtually where it's just virtual attendees. That way they're getting a better experience and can talk to each other and aren't having to try to hear a conversation at a roundtable with a microphone. I mean, it's just not possible. So just think of new and different ways to make the sessions in person and virtual kind of the same, but a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Song, what are your thoughts on this?
One, I really like that Hoover, before all of the pandemic, it was an in-person event app. And so I felt like Hoover really understood how to, have that in-person connection. And then when we all went online, it was a great way, because then there was a desktop version. So now that you have the best of both worlds within Hoover, I certainly, like Ashley said, used Hoover as a platform for engaging my in-person with the app, and then everybody at home, most likely on their desktops, as they're emailing and doing other things during their day. And then also they can obviously get on the app. But we opened up the event app, if you will, maybe a week or so before the in-person, and we plugged in, the community board is such a great way to just get people just to let loose, but I recommend that you precede some questions. And that way it doesn't matter if you're in person or at home, right? And so just getting that engagement from the beginning and getting people super excited, that's so easy on the Hoover app. of course, having checking those little boxes that say remote attendee only or in-person attendee only, because the remote people do not care what time the bus is leaving for the reception. So making sure that you're utilizing that feature and clicking off, and targeting your messages to whichever audience. But then allowing, well, and like Ashley said, it's the experience, right? In person. And I think that out of sight, out of mind, right? And your online folks are you don't see them. And so it's very easy to get caught up in what's happening in person. I kind of had also a checklist for any of my plenary session folks to, thank the online attendees for participating. We did Q&A with some of the plenary sessions, and I was sitting there with the app open. And so I would get the microphone as we were going around and write, hey, we have one question online from so-and-so, and making sure, and then they felt really engaged, right? That you're answering, they're very much there and present through that Q&A. And then Ashley, you said something else I was going to touch on, but now I think I forgot. Oh, the roundtable things, having special, because it's hard. We've all been like in those meetings of like 10 people trying to talk over each other. And then some people are online and some people in person. You're like, oh my God, this is too difficult. We live streamed our keynotes. And then from that keynote topic, we broke into roundtables in person. And so we did the exact same thing with our online, because they all saw the same keynote. Then we cut that live stream and we put all of our online attendees into breakout rooms, and they did their own roundtable discussions based on those. So again, just together yet separate, because the experience is better when it's not necessarily this hybrid thing all the time.
Yeah, those are some great points. And thank you guys both for, sharing your thoughts on this. I think that's super helpful information for everyone. And I see some positive feedback in the chat. So I do want to keep things moving so we can get to those audience questions as well. But my next question is going to shift gears a little bit and talk about cost. So obviously there's a whole new world of things to consider when you're adding a virtual component to an in-person event. Which means that cost becomes an extra concern. So realistically, what do you think the cost of a hybrid event looks like compared to just an in-person event? And Ashley, you can go ahead and start with this one.
I don't really have solid numbers for anyone, because I think it costs different. In Oklahoma, it probably is a lot cheaper than it's going to be in California. But there are things to take into consideration. You're going to need a camera. If you weren't having a camera before, if you didn't have iMac, you're going to need that. You're going to need a Zoom license for every session if you're streaming them at the same time. A lot of times production companies already own a bunch of those, so that can help you when you're hiring those. Obviously, you're going to need an app. You're going to need Whova to help you, connect both worlds. So it is more expensive. That's why I say don't discount your cost. Try to keep things as they're used to, because as soon as you discount them, then they're going to get used to that. So, but yeah, I would say there is going to be an increase in cost for sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Song, what do you think?
I agree. Obviously, you're adding additional components to your event. So yes, the cost will go up. Again, just look at your agenda, look at what you're trying to achieve. And if you can do, some online stuff without necessarily having it be live streamed, or, I had a couple of presenters who were there in person, but they had signed up to give a online presentation. And so they went to their hotel room, they got on their laptop, and they gave their presentation. And that cost us nothing. If you're going to live stream everything, sure, that's definitely additional costs in production. Like Ashley said, Zoom licensing, if you have 10 concurrent sessions and breakouts happening, you're going to need 10 different licenses. But really, it's not that, it doesn't have to be that expensive. If you are using Zoom does not like 4K videos. and so you don't have to have like super high-end production. I know a lot of organizations that do, they go to their, AV team and they have stage sets, basically like TV sets, right? And they do all of their production there and it looks very, very professional. But that's a lot of cost. So yeah, it could get exponentially more expensive. It just really depends on what you're trying to do. And if it's free, you probably don't want to have super high additional costs, so just try to balance those out and ask around, ask your peers how they've done it. I'm glad you all are on this listening to us because it gives you a lot of good ideas to go back and be like, I guess maybe we really do need this, or maybe we don't really need this. And then you can kind of adjust your budget accordingly.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Song. And I think you guys both kind of mentioned, the cost increase really does depend on how you set it up, which kind of transitions perfectly into my next question, which is something you guys have both kind of touched on already, which is, do hybrid events have to live stream to remote audiences? So does that live stream component need to be there? And then what are some alternative or creative options for setting up your hybrid event? Song, you can go ahead and start on this one.
Well, how much time do we have? Because how creative can one get? You can get so creative. And I think that's why we like what we do, right? So do you have to live stream? I don't think so. But I think that there's an expectation from your audience that you're going to. I think that it probably provides that connection with the folks at home and the folks who are in person because they, again, we could have pre-recorded this panel. And would it have been good? Yes. But do you get a different vibe when people know that they're live? Yes. And so I think that some of that basic, good practices and presentations probably comes into play. No, you don't have to live stream everything, but I think some of the big things you certainly should. And if you're spending a lot of money on keynote speakers, you probably should, and give them that opportunity to feel connected to the conference. So did that answer?
Yeah, definitely. Ashley, what do you think? Like, do you have any tips for, alternative ways to set up certain sessions or formatting your event?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the easy answer is no, you don't have to, but I would recommend it. We just did a conference that was hybrid. It was 5,000 people, but they were half in person, half virtual. So we had the main sessions were live streamed, the main general sessions. And then we had some sessions that were just virtual. They were then recorded and put back into the app. And then we had some sessions that were just in person. So, it was kind of a mixture because you're also going to get your speakers that are like, I don't want to travel either, or they can't travel because of, the government's not letting their particular sector travel yet, or, whatever, if you're doing a government conference. But so I think having a mixture is a good idea too. And then, like I said, record everything, put everything back into the app and try to get your speakers engaged in the app as well.
Awesome. Thank you. It sounds like sometimes just, about finding a little bit of a balance for depending on what your event is. So thank you both for sharing on that. We do have just a couple of questions left before we shift into our Q&A. So first, I just want to ask, what is one other piece of advice you would offer to a first-time hybrid event organizer? What is your biggest piece of advice for them? Ashley, you can go ahead and start first.
I'm like, oh gosh, we need to have a full conversation on this. I think the biggest thing that I would say is don't try to reinvent your conference. You don't have to change, your whole entire conference. You don't have to change anything. You really just have to decide what you want to share with virtual and what you want to keep in person. And you need to add a few little things to make sure that your virtual people are engaged, but don't get overwhelmed. And if you do want to change, this is the time to change. If you're like, you know what, I don't want to do 17 breakout sessions anymore, then you change it. And then you're like, we're doing it because it's hybrid. It's a great excuse to, narrow things down, condense things, and really focus on what is important to your meeting and kind of, get out of the minutia of like what you've always done. It doesn't have to be, the same. So
Thank you for that. Song, what about you?
Well, first of all, can everybody see my cup?
Oh,
You're going to need one of those. But no, what Ashley's saying, now is the time, I think, and the silver lining of the pandemic is really that we have learned so much. We've had to try new things. And now that people are kind of used to, oh my gosh, I can actually record something on Zoom. And oh my God, post editing is amazing. There's so many different ways now to be able to even deliver a presentation. And I think the accessibility of online or hybrid conferences is definitely something that, organizations are really interested in, because we all went online and our reach was so much farther. And we connected and stayed connected with more people. So trying to keep that and continue to move forward, like Ashley's saying, it doesn't have to look like it's always looked. And I think that's really important for planners who are like, oh my God, how are we really going to make this happen? Because I don't even know. And the great thing is, again, I crowdsource, talk to your peers, talk to the other event planners that get your key stakeholders involved, ask them what their preferences are, because chances are they've also attended online conferences or hybrid conferences themselves. I would say if you have like a planning committee, sometimes there's you have a planning committee or, your team, talk to them and get them really involved. If you have a board, I always get the board involved, and whether they're participating online or in person or both. I highly recommend that they have some FaceTime. And even if that's like, hey, I always encourage them, get in there, get on those community boards, get in the chat during the sessions. I encouraged my board members to maybe not attend like one session in person, don't attend in person, get online, attend online. So again, you stay connected. People online feel like, the organization really cares about them and their experience online. And that really, really helped, having those key stakeholders involved and almost like be champions or influencers, if you will, of the hybrid conference. And that I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. And I love that you mentioned to talk to your peers and learn from other event planners. That's what we're all here for. So thank you both for those tips. And then my final question before we shift into the live Q&A is, what is your take on the future of hybrid events? Do you think they're here to stay for a while? How do you think the hybrid event format will kind of appear and evolve in the next couple years or the foreseeable future? Does someone want to jump on this one first? Maybe Ashley?
Oh, Song, you unmuted first. Go for it.
Who knows? I don't know. I do think that they're here to stay because, again, the accessibility is so important. Maybe you had 500 people or 1,000 people, in person, and now you have 2,000 online. I don't know, but I think that there's an expectation also of your attendees that there will always be some sort of hybrid option, or I guess no travel option for them to participate. So I don't know. I think that in a sense that they're here to stay, but I certainly think that in the next couple of years, there have been a lot of folks who have not been able to travel, due to the pandemic. And like Ashley said, a lot of government employees and other employees who just have the travel restrictions still in place. So I think that we'll see an uptick in the participation in person for a little bit, because people want to get out and they want to reconnect, and they've just been like starving for the in-person. But we all know the importance and how prominent it has been to stay connected online. So I think that is still very much going to be a part of how we conduct events to stay connected. Whether or not it's going to be super hybrid all the time, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But there's going to be elements that are here to stay, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Ashley, what do you think?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's probably here to stay in some form or fashion. People are just they're used to it now. They're used to working from home now, and everything has changed to be more accessible online. And so yeah, I think that at some point you're going to have to handle both audiences. I hope that, we get to a point where a majority of people are back in person. I think that the sad thing or the hard thing about hybrid is it gives people an out no matter what. So people at the last minute are like, oh, well, I can't come anymore, but I'll just join online. Or even your speakers now are like, oh, I can't be there in person. So can I just speak virtually? And it's like, oh man. So, I think really giving your speakers and your attendees deadlines is going to be important in the future on, are you attending in person? Are you speaking in person? Because, we need to make sure that everyone understands things cost money, shifting and things like that it's going to get hard. So that would be my recommendation for all your future hybrid events.
Well, totally. Awesome. Thank you guys both for sharing on that last question. And we do have a good number of Q&A from our audience. So I just want to shift gears and kind of start going through some of these questions and see how many we can get to. So for our first question, we have from Dana, who asked, I'm looking for some advice for live streaming in-person sessions. One, what is the best way for a presenter to integrate both online and in-person questions in a Q&A? And then two, what sort of costs should we expect for a production team live streaming on stage per day? Long question. Does someone want to jump in on this one first?
Ashley, why don't you take it because you have an AV company?
So I think I talked about this a little bit earlier. The way we handle Q&A is we have a moderator in the room who reads questions. We encourage our in-person attendees and our virtual attendees to put their questions in the app, and then the moderator reads those questions. We encourage them to vote on the questions so that we're reading, the ones that everybody wants to hear. And so that's kind of how we engage the presenter with the online people. Honestly, if you're doing just like one big room and you're live streaming it, your only additional costs there are your camera, your Zoom license, and if you aren't already using Whova, then Whova. So because you can, one manager can handle like sitting in the back of the room and make sure Whova is streaming and, it still work, in person and virtually at the same time. So if it's just one room, it's not going to be that big of a deal.
Yeah, thank you for sharing on that one. Our next question also has a bunch of votes. So from Joffrey, how far in advance did you begin planning for your hybrid event?
I mean, is it the question, how far ahead should you or did you?
However you want to take it.
Exactly.
Right? It's kind of like, oh, we need help and we're doing a hybrid in 2 months. And you're like, okay, we can do it. It's crazy, right? We can do it. That's it. Anyway, I think it depends on what you're doing as a whole, right? If you have your in-person conference and now it's a hybrid conference and if you have, a call for presentations or your speaker selection, right? You still keep the process the same. If you already have an existing timeline, just keep it the same. And I would encourage getting a lot of feedback from your audience or your attendees, asking questions in the registration so that like, hey, are you attending in person or are you attending online? Are you planning on doing this or doing this? And really getting that information from your attendees, I think is ahead of time is important. You could always, of course, just target market and email questions, do a poll for your membership or your past attendees. How likely are you to come in person? And you can kind of crowdsource and get some information that way. And then you'll know, oh man, I don't have to have, 1,800 different streaming breakout sessions. And then you'll be able to plan accordingly.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep moving here. We have a lot of questions. We have another one from Dana who asked, what's a good way to encourage interaction between in-person and online attendees using the Whova platform? So maybe, I know you guys have both kind of touched on this a little bit throughout our discussion, but maybe Ashley, do you want to kind of touch on some things that you've done with the Whova platform for that engagement?
Sure. I think using the community board is a great option because you can start discussions in there. I think Song mentioned earlier that you can even put questions or groups in there before you even open the conference, so that it's kind of already, people are already seeing like, oh, I can join this discussion group and I can talk back and forth to people, and then people can create their own. Using the games and things like that Whova offers are really great, because people can do those virtually and in person. And so that's another way to just make people feel like they're connected within the app. Song, do you have any other?
No, well, that community board is invaluable for engaging both audiences, so because anybody can post at any time. We did run a contest for, whoever's on the leaderboard and whatever, the winner actually received a complimentary registration for next year's in-person, and the person who won was an online participant. So that was kind of fun. So yeah, it's just use what you got, and what you have in Whova is actually pretty awesome.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, we have tons of questions. I'm just trying to pick out some that are voted for the most. We have a question from Alyssa, who says, we're planning to have some of our presenters pre-record their workshops to be available after the event, mostly to support people who have to miss it in person because of concurrent sessions. Have you had any experience with this format, and how has it gone? Does anyone have any insights on this question that they want to share?
Yes, we let's see, we did a session or a conference recently where we had everyone pre-record their sessions. Our kind of like little tip is to have them send their recordings to you and then create a Vimeo link with those recordings and then place them in Whova. That's going to save you a little bit of money. So you're not having to pay for storage of videos. It's also going to make a lot more work for you. So if you don't have time or the staff to do that, then you can also use Whova, speaker email that basically just sends it out. They can then upload their own video and then you're done, which is fantastic. So I think you can use either option. I think the on-demand sessions are fantastic, especially if you're just streaming your general session. So if you're going to ask all of your breakout session presenters to record their sessions, then they're at least feeling like they still get to see all the same content that the in-person people are seeing.
Awesome. Thank you. We have another question that says, we can't afford a production company, so we're going to do a virtual event before our in-person event. How can we get the word out so that both are well attended? I'm not sure if either of you have, run an event in this particular format, but I know that both of you have mentioned great strategies for, engaging and promoting the events. And maybe Song, do you want to kind of share some thoughts on this if you have them?
Sure. It's get with your marketing team. And if you are the marketing team, then, but it really is just about getting the word out, right? How whoever's attending, or what are the benefits or what are the differences between attending in person or attending the online. If you're worried about low attendance in one, how can you bolster up? And really, I think transparency is the best way to go with this. It's like, here's what you get, like exactly, and be really concise, bullet point the value of attending each or the differences. Sometimes maybe you need to do a side-by-side comparison so that people can really be like, should I attend this one or should I attend this one? And then they really get just to know the differences between both, or the value of both. But that's what I would recommend. And again, if you're wondering or worried about low attendance at one, then see how you can market the value of attending that. Or you can bribe them. It's like, hey, we're doing a raffle for everybody who's attending online. There's certainly different ways that you can encourage attendance.
I think also, if you're worried about people attending online, we've done some like unique little things for the online people. So you can do a cooking class, you can do a magician, you can do a trivia game, like, and just try to market some stuff that like are different than, what your in-person is getting, but then make sure that you're still doing some fun, creative things for your virtual attendees. Send them all a box with all the snacks that they're going to get in person. So that they're like really, engaged, and, or send them a cocktail kit so that they can have their own little happy hour. So we've done some just like crazy things like that just to try to get people involved.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Let's see. We have another question from Sandra, who asked, how do you encourage in-person attendees networking with virtual attendees? How do you encourage in-person attendees to join the virtual activities like roundtables during a live in-person conference? Does someone want to start off with this one? So I guess the question is kind of networking across the different audiences.
Yeah, that one's a hard one, because getting your in-person people to talk to your virtual people, I think just reminding everyone at all your sessions, I think Song said earlier, like, thank your virtual attendees for attending this session. In-person attendees, be sure to hop on the app and talk to your friends virtually. Just keep, hammering that in, that there are other people attending virtually. And then maybe doing a game that involves both through the app, like the leaderboard and things like that. With a prize, that always gets people to do stuff, like Song said, bribe them. And then they'll have to get on the app and participate. So.
Okay. So our next question from Linda, who asked, just lost it. From Linda, who asked, do you recommend having the presenters present directly via the Zoom link attached to the Whova event or through the Whova app? Of course, the online guests will view through the Whova app. So I guess this is sort of a question about the back end for virtual presentations.
I allowed some of my speakers were not attendees who were presenting online, and their schedules are insane, and they didn't even want to log on to Whova. It was like literally they were presenting and then they were out. So I just had them join via the Zoom link. I didn't make them get on Whova. But obviously, in that prep email, right, saying, hey, and it would be really great if you can participate in the chat or through the live Q&A at the end, whatever that is. But some people, it didn't matter, which is kind of nice, right? It didn't matter if they went through the Whova app or not. Or some of my presenters got lost. They got lost in the app because they hadn't gone on and taken the time to find their stuff in the agenda. Or they used a different email address. That happens often. And so it was great. It was so easy for myself or the room host to just get that Zoom link and send it directly to the presenter, and then they were able to get on.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. My next question is a tricky question, I think, for you all, but the question asks, what do you think is the most tricky part of a hybrid event? And what are the disadvantages which participants see? That question's from Gabriella.
I mean, that's a loaded question, Gabriella. It depends. It depends on how you're running it. If it's a hybrid in the sense that it's a simultaneous online and in person, then sometimes I think the trickiest part is remembering your online audience, right? Because again, out of sight, out of mind. There's happy hour in person. There's, somebody, I don't know, the camera quit work. I don't know. But so sometimes I think that the online component just in and of itself, if you're running it simultaneously with your in-person, is difficult. So having at least one other person besides yourself monitoring whatever else is going on strictly online is going to be really helpful. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the trickiest parts. And sometimes in person, right, the Wi-Fi is either super expensive or it just sucks, because as soon as you leave a certain space, it like will cut you off. And so if you're the one trying to manage the online stuff, making sure that you have a meeting planner space or a dedicated, we call them a war room, right? We had kind of one of the presidential suites, and I had a lot of my online staff in person there in this big conference room. And that's how we were managing and making sure that these concurrent sessions were happening online. And then the in-person stuff was just flowing great. So those are a couple tricky parts, I think.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Ashley, do you want to add on to this one?
I think you can make it more tricky, but you can also make it less tricky. So we did the same thing with the conference recently. We had an in-person team, and then we had a bunch of sessions that were just presenting virtually. And there were, probably 8 at a time. So we had a full tech team. We have a tech for every session. We just always do it that way, plus me managing the whole team. So, in that instance, you're making sure your speakers are there. If they're not there, then your techs are, telling you, hey, my speaker's not here. It can't start on time. You can't move on with the session until your speaker's there. And so there are just like little tricky things like that come up that you don't really think about until you're, in the weeds of it. But I think being prepared, having the correct amount of staff, it will help it be a little less tricky.
Awesome. I am going to wrap it up there. That was a tough last question, but thank you guys for tackling it. It is just about 9 a.m. here in Pacific time. So I think I'm going to wrap up the session for today, but I just want to thank Ashley and Song so much for speaking on our little panel today and for sharing your experiences with all of us.
Thanks for watching. If you found this panel helpful, subscribe to our channel to find more videos just like this. You can check out the other topics we have featured in the Event Insider series and more content for event planners. See you next time.